I want to talk about culture and language today. This is clearly not the first time I covered this topic, but I think it's important. But if you guys have been listening to this hip hop debate, you would have noticed that the proponents of this 50-50 hip hop narrative never talk about culture and language in terms of where hip hop comes from. For me, it's clear. It's foundation of Black American culture. They always refer to hip hop as a multicultural creation, which it's not. There are creators and then there are contributors. Latinos are the latter. They have no problem saying Jamaicans brought sound class culture to hip hop or that Latinos brought congas, bongos, timbales to hip hop. While I strongly disagree with that assessment, that is clearly their position. The thing that I find so revealing and disturbing about them, anything that is attributed to foundational Black American culture or in hip hop is characterized as street music, street dance, street fashion, etc. Never Black American culture. Am I the only one that sees that? In order to present this multicultural narrative, they can't admit that these things actually come from Black American culture because to do so would destroy their whole platform and they would have to end their YouTube channels. So the lie has to continue. Here's the thing that gets me. They say, no. We're not trying to erase Black Americans from hip hop. But that's what they're doing. When you label our contributions as street culture and not attributing those creations to Black Americans, it's hard not to see that as erasure. Your intentions are very clear. There is no debate about the influence that Black American music and entertainment has had on the world and continues to have on the world. Our culture is celebrated all over the world. But what often flies under the radar is our vernacular, also known as AAVE. That too is very important and very popular. This type of English is oftentimes erroneously referred to as street language. Language is extremely important to culture. When you examine the language utilized in urban America, it's laced with AAVE. Many non-Black Americans who grow up in proximity to Black Americans pick up this speech pattern and vernacular. They acquire this type of speaking in a way that is seamless because as a child, that's all they heard. Acculturation, I talked about this before. Acculturation is when you adopt the cultural norms from a different culture without being aware of it. Oftentimes, when you confront non-Black Americans in the hood and inform them that their speech patterns and vernacular is rooted in Black American culture, there can be some kind of pushback, right? It's a hard thing to admit that a major part of your identity comes from an ethnic or racial group that is not your own. For many Latinos in the hood, hip hop is their culture, and for someone to say that their culture is largely created by another group other than themselves may come across as disrespectful. But upon closer examination of urban culture, it is not difficult to see that Black Americans planted the seeds and created what we know today as hip hop. Now, that's a hard pill for many Latinos to swallow, but that happens to be the truth.
Calling AAVE internet or stan culture is a blatant erasure of Black people from our own language, our own creations. You can't love and obsess over culture and attempt to ignore the people attached to it. AAVE used by non-Black people is cultural appropriation. Remember when it was called Ebonics and folks were freaking out about it because they thought it was going to set us back as a people? Ebonics or AAVE wasn't acceptable then to anyone but us. And now the TikTokers think it's cool to use AAVE. Our native tongue has been rinsed off and repackaged for an unseasoned, watered-down version of our culture. And it's very obvious that Black culture is the culture, and you can't consume our culture without giving us proper credit and honoring it and honoring us. If Black people were actually cared about more than the usage of AAVE, maybe we wouldn't have to convince the masses that Black lives matter. The Black culture y'all love so much has Black people attached to it.
Language and culture are closely related to each other. Language can be viewed as a verbal expression of culture. It is used to maintain and convey culture and cultural ties. Language provides us with many of the categories which we use for expression of our thoughts. Therefore, it is natural to assume that our thinking is influenced by the language. Learning about culture is just as important as learning the language. To fully appreciate a language, we need to understand the culture of the people who speak it. Language is the method of human communication, either in written or spoken form, whereas culture is the idea, values and beliefs which we have in our society.
Slave descendants have a unique linguistic heritage in comparison to every other immigrant group that came to this country. African slaves, when they were captured, were often isolated linguistically from others that spoke their own mother tongue while they were on the west coast of Africa. That linguistic isolation was also maintained on the ships during the Atlantic crossing. And as a result of that, not one indigenous African language has survived the Atlantic crossing intact. Once they got here, it was illegal to teach them to read and write. For hundreds of years, slaves were denied access to education. As a result of that, many of the linguistic stereotypes, many of the negative linguistic stereotypes that people embrace regarding African American English, dismissing it as, the language of someone who's being lazy or not attending to language, doesn't fully appreciate the linguistic isolation that slave descendants experienced is unlike any other immigrant group in this country.
When they were brought here, African Americans were segregated into plantations. That's what happened in the Caribbean also. And what they did was to invent new languages, new varieties, taking linguistic properties from the surrounding varieties and creating new forms. These are creations of people put in an absolutely horrible set of circumstances, and out of that milieu came new language forms.
It's so interesting, this issue of identity, language, acceptance, and inclusion or exclusion. I want to be included, so I will use a certain type of language. Who wants to be excluded?
You have this kind of complex push in which on the one hand, the language is vibrant, it's fulfilling, it's expressive, it's enjoyable. And on the other hand, you have African Americans dealing with the larger society, getting pushback, getting misunderstanding.
Unless you have your own company or you're a rapper or you're an athlete with vernacular, you are going to be pushed out of opportunities and marginalized. For survival, economic survival, I'm going to have to do that song and dance.
Wherever there were African slaves, they contributed to shaping American English. And then came Jim Crow, and then the Great Migration, and something that had emerged in the southeastern part of the United States was spread.
I'm in between Cali, St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Philly, New York. You'll get a different greeting, and that's just the start. I can go down to Atlanta and say, what it do? Detroit, what up, though? New York, what's up, sir? Cali, what up, blood? You better be careful where you at if you say blood, though. But they know if you say, what's up, blood, it's family.
Well, I'm from a place where we don't use the dialect that I use here, but I'm able to maneuver with it. So you might hear, what up, shorty? What up, though? And I'll just give them something that I have from Detroit. It'd be like, what up, shorty? I'd be like, what up, though? Or if you go to New Orleans and say, hey, Wody. The language gives you access and it'll give you a barrier. So the best thing to do is use it for your access.
Myself, Shaka Zulu, and a few other people who were hired to be on hip hop radio in 1997, right? Were invited on BET with Tavis Smiley, and it was called BET Talks. And it was talking about the change in radio, like the changing of the guard. Like it had changed from the old school days of black radio, where radio guys talk like this, welcome to the shows, WKBC, W so, can you dig it, blah, blah, blah. And it became, you know what it is? You know, it was that hip hop language, just the way we talk and spoke. You know, we're just speaking our everyday language, but that was different from the language of radio prior to that period of time. It was a change in language, but we wasn't thinking about it in that sense. It was just our music, just who we were. But to be on the radio playing these records and to be saying, yo, here's another dope joint from Schoolie D, PSK, you know what it means, bang, and play the record. You know, if you wasn't in the culture, you didn't understand that.
As a child in the hood, it was all black. And the only time we seen white people was we went a town over and they owned the stores. It wasn't a shared cultural kind of exchange going on. We communicated with the black vernacular, with how we communicate to make it cool, make it fly, make it dope, to give you that hood pass. So you had to learn that.
Why do kids growing up in the black community have to become skilled at language use? The community requires it. The culture requires it. If you can't defend yourself verbally growing up in a black community, a traditional black community, then everybody else picks on you. You're forced to develop, you could think of them as verbal defenses. I prefer to think of them as verbal skills. If you grow up in that kind of language environment, you come to like it and appreciate it.
Every once in a while, I'll receive a comment from someone overseas, and they will say, they don't get it. What is all this controversy about where hip hop comes from? Of course, it comes from Black American culture. They're not confused because the music and the vernacular of hip hop speaks to its creators. Our reach is global and very influential, and it's very strong. Now, I'm going to play a few clips of UK hip hop practitioners using AAVE, whether it's in a normal conversation or with friends or performing on stage. Many of the words and phrases you will find very recognizable.
Kilo 94.9 is Stay Fierce with you till 10. That's Roger Johnson on the wheels of steel. Roaming our rap lines now on 2242.
So they can listen to it and they say, yeah, it's a good beat or whatever.
It's making the beat. It's above a beat with a bass. Just chilling. Bumping with a cap on.
You know I like to rap on, I'll rap on.
You can rap about what you want about. You can rap about yourself, your style, and politics, and just anything you want to release.
Rapping, it's destructive rhyming. This thing not committing no crime in 89. It has to rhyme, it has to rhyme. If it doesn't rhyme, it ain't a rap.
Hip-hop is a music, so play it.
Voice on the YouTube, think it will say it.
Microphone, getting funky with the vocal. Def G MC Rule on a show called Low Down. Low Down.
Usually now, when I'm performing live, I always have the rapper with me, and like I'm doing, just like cutting all the breaks, and he'll be rapping on top of it, and that is really making music out of it.
But before, wow, you want some more? It's like this. The man like DJ Fingers, fresher than ever out the box, and we're gonna have some fun. Check it out. Without my DJ, I can make the crowd scream. The lyrics so divine, I'll dream, that's what it seems. But don't think that, cause you're gonna be wrong. I'm in the flesh, homeboy, it's all feel strong, yeah. The mess is bad, looking good and not whack. We super cross the lyrics, I will make you get flat. So let's get busy on my command. I now declare this party and jam. You're in your mind to figure how I'll do it. You get into it, trust and wanna get down to it. Cause that's my power. When I hold the mic, it's not just maybe, it's what I like. That's why I dominate the rapping division. To stay at the top is my only ambition. So think, homeboy, before you make a stand. Cause I'm the man known who can rock these jams. I love my Kentucky and I love my mom. And if you ask the death rhymes, I love.
In African American language, you can say things like, he happy, or John tall, or he the man. You might say, well, okay, folks are just leaving out is or are. But they're not just leaving it out. In language, nothing is ever just like random. You can just leave it out or put it in. No, there's a very, very strict set of rules. Like there's some places where you can't leave it out. John be studying Saturday nights, okay? Now a lot of people think that be is just like is in English. I could look at somebody sitting in front of me and I could say, John's sitting down right now. But I can't say, John, be sitting down right now. Be always means that something happens habitually, frequently, and so on.
Now let's listen to this short clip of an interview featuring Fat Joe. Within a minute, he will use words and phrases borrowed from AAVE. If you listen closely, you will hear him say, "I was like, yo." Shortly after that, you will hear him say, "I be like." Both phrases are common phrases within AAVE. The term house N-word is clearly a term that comes from AAVE. This clearly demonstrates the depth in which AAVE is commonplace in urban America. The expressions of AAVE is more evident with those individuals who speak hip-hop language, i.e. Latinos. Terms like chill, crib, stacks, racks, bugging, tripping, etc. all come from AAVE. The language of the people should tell you where hip-hop culture comes from. That's not my opinion. That's just pure science. And if you choose to continue to call AAVE street vernacular or street language, that's erasure of Black people. And we're not having that.
I wasn't going to lose that moment of World Series and not talk about Puerto Rico. It's the only thing I could think of. Yeah. When I was walking out, I was like, yo, Puerto Rico. Right? And so I'm going to double down on what Viola Davis said was it breaks my heart when I see people talk about, and I tell you, if any one of you guys got Puerto Rican friends, when you go over there and you go visit, the first thing they tell you is, my island, my island. Yo, you went to my island? You enjoy they tell me that. I'm not from Puerto Rico. They be like, my island, you was there. I see the picture, my island. How the hell are they gonna call Puerto Rico an island of garbage? Yes. And when I post on my Instagram, these the guys you voting for, and I see Puerto Ricans saying, no, we're still for Trump, 2024. That's that house mentality. Yeah, yeah. You know, that's the Latino that wish he was white. Right.
Hip-hop began in the early 1970s by marginalized youth of the South Bronx in New York City. The culture gave these youth a platform to be seen and heard, which placed them in a center for better or worse. The four original elements of hip-hop are writing, DJing, breaking, MCing. Knowledge of self and community was added later. MCing, rapping, is the most notable and perhaps lucrative of the elements. Rap music unapologetically articulates the social, political, cultural, and economic issues in Black communities by employing the Black language. Moreover, listen to this, moreover, there is no hip-hop without Black language. No matter the element, the whole culture revolves around elaborate Black storytelling that catches the audience ears, imaginations, and hearts.
I'm the hottest thing you say. Mental institutions asking me, is you saying?
You basic dude, you tripping. Lace your shoes, think again, deja vu. Play with me, you play to lose. Call your homies, it be the bravest fools. I mean, take the clues.
An individual's ability to speak spontaneously, authoritatively, in the vernacular is not only highly prized, but is literally used in verbal combat.
When you finish round one, boy, you cast a stone. Look at the crowd, they eyes glued like they got lashes on in the draft zone. I'm with some mean boys, run up deep in the Jaheim voice, while you at the crib with your son watching Nickelodeon Teen Choice.
You often throw a lot of negative shots at each other, and they're not necessarily genuine.
Your mama joke, your cousin, there's no boundaries, I've heard all the type of jokes, all the type of direct blazes, or somebody might call it blaze, and it didn't have to be like, I hate you and boom, it's just, we just battled with words,
It's as much about the language itself and the connections that are being made as it is about how the language, how it's being delivered.
People think that African American English is picking up these things from hip hop, when in fact hip hop is making use of long-standing features of African American English.
That leads me into another thing that I thought was really interesting. You go into a lot of depth talking about Black English and how that's affected pop language, and actually a lot of the using letters, not for the sound of the letters so much, but using letters as a code, including you trace the phrase 24/7 to Black English, which, and I think as I remember you expressed your surprise, because I was like, oh, I would have thought that was definitely a tech sort of spin-off.
Yeah, and I thought it was for convenience stores or something.
That's another good one. Of course, I use that in the library because it's a perfect phrase. It's a phrase that fits a need.
Right. Well, Black English has had more effect than any other source on what is now popular language and, by extension, pop language, and because so much of Black English, starting with slavery and on through the jazz era and so forth, so much of Black English was developed as sort of a code, especially during slavery, so that the master wouldn't know what people were really saying or thinking or feeling. So they had to find a way to appear to be proper in doing what they were supposed to do, but had a much more subversiveness with it. They were able to communicate with each other more subversively with words that were coded, so that the white people wouldn't understand what they were saying. And that sense of a code, we still have that. So much of slang is based on various codes and secret or mutual understandings that are not open to the wider public. And everybody wants to be in on the code. Everybody wants to be in there. That's the cool place to be. That's the inside place. And so what's happened so interestingly, I think, is that Black English is now so popular, mostly through hip-hop at this point, that the language of an excluded people is now imitated by non-excluded people in order to sound more included, to sound more inside. You have to sound like an outsider to sound more inside now. And so it's not just with phrases that come from the Black community, like 24/7 or my bad, or dozens of others, cool being the preeminent pop word of all time, for instance. It's not just the individual words themselves, it's the whole attitude toward language and subverting it to communicate with presumably like-minded people. Putting Z's on the end of words, which everybody does now, but that started as a Black thing, and the X in other words also started as sort of a Black thing. And the whole attitude of so much let me back up a minute. Black language is sort of the official, unofficial speech of America.
So I did the FAFO thing. I really hope that this is not FAFO.
So this is a PSA and the official social media record noting that the phrase F around and find out is an Afro-American proverb. It is a proverb that has been used in our community for at least 100 years. So now that everybody outside of our community is starting to use this word, or this phrase rather, I want it to be noted for the official record that it is an Afro-American proverb. Before it gets mixed up with Gen Z slang, which is still really mostly Afro-American vernacular, I want it to be noted for the record that you all found out and know that it is in fact an Afro-American proverb. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Now, as a result of the re-election of Donald Trump for president, the phrase FAFO has resurfaced in a huge way. And this is largely due to the degree that people are feeling anxiety about not knowing what to expect from a second Donald Trump presidency. The term literally has gone viral. Many people have attributed the term to just simply internet slang. However, like most slang in American English, that term's root is in AAVE. So much of Black American culture is just simply absorbed in the mainstream of American culture, so many people just are not aware that this is part of Black American English. Many are often surprised to discover that is in fact that Black Americans have created most of the slang terms in American English. So let's look at two articles or portions of two articles that speaks to FAFO's origins. This is from blendspace.com. Phrase origins. This is relatively a new phrase dating back to the early 2000s. According to Google Trends, the first documented use of FAFO was in 2004. At that time, FAFO was predominantly used in the Afro-American community. People who used it usually said it in its full form instead of its acronym. Later, during the 2010s, FAFO was mostly forgotten. Then in the early 2020s and 2022 in particular, FAFO became an extremely popular phrase. No longer was it solely used in Afro-American communities, and people from different socioeconomic circles embraced it. All right, this is from the Washington Post. I'm going to start the second line down where it says, Jesse Sheet Lauer, a lexicographer and editor of the book, The F Word, told me he has traced the phrase as far back as 2007, originating in African American slang, but that he only really became aware of it a couple of years ago. On Google Trends, you can see FAFO gradually pick up steam and then soar this past December. That was the moment that Kanye West got booted off Twitter for tweeting the unflattering photo of the platform meme lord turned overlord Elon Musk.
People of African descent have been moving from the beginning of time and interacting and transforming. I think there's some things that are constant, but I also think it's constantly transforming.
People may feel like the things that they're saying, regardless if it's considered, improper English, that's what may make them feel the closest to home. So it's almost like, kind of like a special legacy.
For me, Black language is natural. That's the language, the first language I speak. It's my first language. It's how my people adapted to whatever, having their language stripped away or having to put it together from different parts and pieces of different creoles, or it's what we did with what we had, and that is not just sufficient, it's more than enough. My hope is that we begin to see our language and everything else that we can do that way.
When I was a child, when whites would imitate black speech, it was often done in a racist way to make fun of the way that black people talked. Through time and with the advent of hip hop, you now see white kids in suburban malls with their baseball caps on backwards. They're imitating black speech patterns, but they're doing so because they try to embrace the culture. Even though our culture has been the object of racist discrimination, it's also been embraced by American society as really being very cool. Our styles of speaking, our styles of dress, the way we dance, the music, the food, it's cool.
There is no doubt. We are the culture. We are the trendsetters. We are the influencers. Marketers choose us to promote what is trendy and what is cool. That's just a fact. If you haven't already, subscribe. I would love to have you. Make sure you thumb up that video. Don't leave this video unless you thumb it up first, and then share it. Please share this information. It's valuable. All right? So until the next time, peace.
Carter G. Woodson, historian, publisher, educator, born in 1875, known as the father of Black history. Son of former slaves, received his BA from the University of Chicago, was the second Black American and the first person of enslaved parentage to earn a PhD from Harvard. In 1915, Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life as a way to encourage scholars and educators to work in the field of Black history. In 1926, Woodson proposed and started the annual February Negro History Week, which would become Black History Month in 1976. Apparently, Woodson chose February because it held the birthdays of both President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Thank you, Carter G. Woodson, for paving the way. We salute you.